Multiply Podcast. Today in studio we have my friend and mentor, Dr. Fred Garmon. Dr. Garmon, welcome to the Multiply Podcast.
Thank you, Eddie. It's good to be with you. I'm thrilled.
Likewise. It's really, really good. It's funny because when, you don't know this, but when we started putting together the idea for the podcast over a year ago at this point, I had made a list of guests that once we get to probably 20 episodes in, something like that, built a little bit of a following and so on, that I couldn't wait to invite them to be on. So this episode will be right in the mid-20s, 25, 26. And I'm just so excited to have you here because this has been over a year in the thought.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you would say that because I've been waiting on you to invite me. When I found out that you were doing this and you were doing it with such excellence and that you were really buying into it and that you were already into this thing, I kept asking myself, and I laid awake at night wondering, now, why has my good friend and protege, Eddie, not invited me to be on that podcast? So I've lost sleep over this, brother.
Well, you know, I'm glad to do you a favor. Too funny. Well, we know each other really well, and but our guests, may not necessarily know you. And so I'd like to, give a little bit of an introduction to you and then also talk about how we kind of connected. And then from there, start to unpack a conversation about your experiences, because you have a tremendous wealth of experience that has been such a blessing, I know, to many people, and especially to us and to our community here in Cleveland. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. You've pastored for over 30 years in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, correct?
Well, actually, 3 different churches.
Really?
Oak Ridge was one of those 3. But I've been in the ministry even longer than that, starting out with youth pastor,
right,
evangelist, and so on. But pastoring 25 to 30 years between youth pastor and actually senior pastor.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's a lot of years shepherding people.
Yeah, I have gray hair, brother.
And, for people to understand, how many years were you in Oak Ridge?
Well, the first church that we pastored, we were there for 2 years. That's Lake City, Florida, where we actually built a church right on the interstate there.
Oh, wow.
Just south of Lake City, Florida, inside the state line there. As you're going down, you'll see the church right on the left-hand side on 75 South. So we were there 2 years. That's an experience in and of itself. We can talk about later, especially when it comes to conflict and so on and so forth.
Wow.
But we literally built that church with our hands. And then in Lehigh Acres, Florida, which is South Florida, right outside of Fort Myers, we were there for about 9-10 years.
Oh, wow.
And built another church there, took an existing church, but built a larger church facility. I raised our 2 girls there in that South Florida Gulf kind of situation. And then we were called back to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And when I say called back to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, because right out of Lee University in 1980, when I graduated, I went to Oak Ridge as youth pastor.
Oh, wow.
But I had been there since 78, part-time, driving back and forth for 2 years. I was 80-something miles from Cleveland, Tennessee to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, as their youth pastor, part-time, their first full-time staff member. And then Shirley and I spent 2 years there after getting married as youth pastors. So we were at Oak Ridge, interestingly, for 4 years as youth pastors. Left there, evangelized, state youth director, did a lot of other stuff. And 17 years later, were called back from Lehigh Acres, Florida at this point, to be senior pastor at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So we were there twice. 4 years as youth pastor, and then another 10 years as the senior pastor. And that's when we stepped out of ministry and worked at the seminary, Pentecostal Theological Seminary, your alma mater and
that's
mine,
right.
for several years. And then went into People for Care and Learning and so on and so forth for missionary work.
So, if you're not a local, I didn't know this until I moved. Oak Ridge, Tennessee isn't some podunk, small town, backwater. No, Oak Ridge, Tennessee is often referred to as the highest per capita number of geniuses in the country.
Yeah.
And we'll get a little bit more into that because I am curious at, because I knew you had pastored in Florida, and I'd be curious to understand, different congregations take different approaches.
Sure.
Right? Different cultures, different climates. But,
sure.
We'll look at that. So in pastorate for over 30 years. 11 years you were a missionary. That was with People for Care and Learning, and then also as a superintendent over Southeast Asia. Is that accurate?
That's right, for the Churches of God World Missions, yes.
Yeah, which we'll get into that as well. And then you also served 10 years in leadership organization with your personal organization called LeaderLabs.
That's right. Actually, while we were at Oak Ridge and when we finished our PhD in organizational leadership, we started LeaderLabs. Shirley came up with the name and got that domain, and it stuck with us. And I started trying to do leadership development, Christian formation from that perspective, the way I do it, you know, as I call it, plundering the Egyptians, using intellectual data and anything from corporate and nonprofit sectors, pulling it through a biblical filter so that we can sharpen the saw for ministry with supplemental skill sets and so on. But those things, you know, the timing wasn't right. And the church at that point, 20-something years ago, the biggest pushback I had was, why are you trying to bring corporate stuff into the church? And so that kind of went on the back burner, and I did it little by little by little. Now to come to find out, you know, that it was actually God's design. It was helping me to sharpen this to my skill set, to learn more, to put the 10,000 hours in, if you will. And then it came full circle after pastoring, after the missionary work in Southeast Asia, and then to step away, which is another story in and of itself as to why we stepped away from missionary work. Why, you know, how is it that God moves you at certain segments and certain times in life? So when he moved us, we decided we would go full time into LeaderLabs. What a grand step of faith it was, to do that, to walk away from, and I've done that several times, you know, walk away from pastorate where you've got the security. You've been 20, 30 years, 3 decades building up the salary, the benefits, the what all the things that come with that. You know, you're very secure. And in ministry full time, if you give up your church, then you give up your piece on the chessboard. And you have to start all over again. So it's a big decision. And so we gave it up and went into missionary work. And, you know, it was interesting because the board at People for Care and Learning said, well, we're going to give you the same salary you've got at your church. My wife's a business major, and you know her well.
Oh, she's brilliant.
Yeah, she's brilliant. And so that was important to her. And I went back out to the car after that meeting and accepted that position and said, we're going to be moving, and what are they going to pay you? You know, was one of her first questions. And I said, we're going to get the same thing we got at church. Well, that's wonderful. I said, well, there's a little hitch here, and that is we have to raise it all. They don't have any money.
Nice.
So, you know, but the Lord was good, and that worked out very, very well. But what happens is 10 years later, we decided to go with LeaderLabs, and it wasn't really our decision. And we'll get there, I imagine. Because things happened that caused us to make that move, to go full-time to LeaderLabs. And it really got down to where there weren't very many options. And this is what I had been preparing for. It was my passion. So this was just, all right, let's step out in faith and let's try this again and see if the context is more accepting. And it was. And so we've been doing it full time ever since.
There's a quote that you taught me over the last, you know, several years of our relationship. And it was that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Oh, yeah. Peter Drucker.
Yeah, Peter Drucker. Such a great quote.
Yeah, exactly.
So the culture, when you initially tried to launch LeaderLabs, could not support the strategy that you were trying to implement. And when the culture had grown to a point to where it could support the strategy, then the strategy fits within the culture. And now you've developed 5 executive leader programs that you travel all over the world. I mean, it's so wild. You know, people that don't know you don't realize how seldom you're at home. You're always on the road. The fact that you're here with me now is such a joy. And I know that you're probably going to be home for a couple of days, and I don't know your schedule, but I'd bet next week you're in a different continent.
Yeah, well, it is interesting. Next Friday and Saturday, I'm back in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
And then the next weekend, or the next 5 days or 6 or 7, whatever it might be on my calendar, I'm in Bogota, Colombia. So yeah, you're right.
Pretty close.
There's a lot of travel. However, in this season, we can talk about it because I have learned to say no to a lot of things. When I was doing People for Care and Learning, and in Southeast Asia, we were coming back and forth. I didn't actually live in Southeast Asia. I spent about half my life in Southeast Asia and half my life in the United States because we were raising money. And my team on the other side of the world was much, much larger than my team here in the United States at People for Care and Learning headquarters here in Cleveland. And so I went back and forth 54 times to Southeast Asia.
Wild. 54 trips.
5 times a year. And so, yeah, jet lag gets to you after a while.
Yeah.
And you might notice I move differently and jerk a little bit from time to time.
Nice.
But jet lag has its way of paying its toll on you. But the culture does eat strategy for breakfast. But that's a story in and of itself. That seems to be a sound bite that you can use, that I can use for my entire life.
Right.
Because, it said that life is lived forward, but it's understood backward.
Nice.
And now at 68 years old, looking back at these almost 7 decades, I can see how that statement that you bring up by Peter Drucker, the father of modern management, culture eats strategy for breakfast, culture, and we're in East Tennessee doing this podcast, so the colloquial way of saying that is the way we do things around here.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's culture.
Yeah.
And in every aspect of our lives, we're living life in a culture. We're living life in some context, in some environment. And culture is so pervasive. It is so real, and it impacts us so much. In fact, it's one of the 10 essential skills of executive leadership, that first executive leadership program. It is the 8th lab, culture, and I call it the water you swim in.
Right.
What does a fish think about the water it swims in? It doesn't, and yet it is pervasive. What do we think about the air we breathe? We really don't, but it is essential to life, and so culture is that way. And when you start understanding these nuances, you understand why Peter Drucker said culture eats strategy for breakfast. It is that important, and either you are helping to shape that culture intentionally,
right,
or you are unconsciously being shaped by that culture. And so I've had to learn that the hard way. And in those early years, those early decades, it was shaping me. And I was finding, bumping up against it. It's just like that, the church culture of the 1980s and 90s
right,
and into the 2000s was still very, very much a maintenance-minded church culture, in that they were really focused on themselves. We were focused on religiosity. We could get into all this. Mission. The mission mindset was not really as huge. In some places it was. It depends,
Right. Your 2 favorite words.
We'll actually get to that, right? But the culture did begin to change. And by the time that we were stepping out of missionary work and the Lord was leading us into that direction, then I found that there was this new openness to the kinds of things that I was trying to teach for the last 20 years. Things that I have learned. I had said to myself as a minister, where has this stuff been?
And I have heard in many of the courses that you've taught, that I've joined you on, that I've sat in as a student, that exact phrase from other pastors, directors, regional leaders, state directors sitting next to me. Like I remember I was sitting next to Mike Whitmire, great guy.
Yes.
We served together in a different board with him for Men and Women of Action. And I remember I was in LeaderLabs 3.0 or Training for Trainers, one of them. And I just remember Mike leans over to me and he goes, man, where has this stuff been? And I thought to myself, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. That's how everyone in this room feels. That's the same phrase that you've been saying to me for years now.
Yeah.
No, it's very, very true.
Well, it was interesting because, it's exactly, I can remember the night in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I was working on my PhD and was just, neck deep on a Saturday night into reading and studying and researching and writing, and these concepts that they at Regent University in Virginia Beach were exposing me to, and pulling those corporate marketplace concepts, those academic leadership concepts, through that biblical filter, they were exploding not only in my mind and my intellect, but in my heart,
Right.
and in my passion for ministry. And I was just by default, and now looking back, it was the Holy Spirit also working, bringing things to my remembrance and connecting the biblical dots. And I leaned back that night and said, where has this stuff been? You know, I've been in the deep end of the pool as a minister, and that's something that we as pastors do not like to admit.
Right.
You know, it's not the most favorite phrase of any of us, especially if we're ambitious and we want to make a difference. It's not easy to say, that's not my experience. I'm kind of in the deep end of the pool here. But that's where I was. And then all of a sudden I started finding these resources and these concepts and these principles that were just like water on a desert floor.
Right.
You know, it's just like, gosh, this is so good. And so in that process, and it was so fundamental and it was so elementary and it was so naive, but it was, well, I think I'm going to develop something that I'm going to teach pastors all over the world. And of course, you know, I was going to start right there with my church.
Right.
And I did. But, you know, I'm just as surprised as anybody, probably more so, that I get to do what I do and that it has actually gained the kind of leverage and the kind of traction,
Yeah.
you know, that it has. In fact, Tim Hill, the former general overseer of the Church of God and now also our administrative bishop here in Tennessee, great leader.
Great leader.
He was the one that said that to me that really caught my attention and let me know, well, okay, this is not just me reading my own press, but this evidently is a true thing. When I hear it from you and then I hear it from him, he says, the number one thing I hear everywhere I go about LeaderLabs and about what you're teaching, this subject content, is where has this stuff been?
Yeah.
And so I wish I could get that across to more people.
Right.
Because still to this day, if I'm looking at it through percentages, the kind of stuff I teach still in its first perspective to those looking on or hearing it for the first time doesn't sound so spiritual. You know, it's not as evangelistic and revival oriented as some of the things that we, especially as in our Pentecostal culture, would like to have. And yet for me, it is deeply spiritual, and it is deeply something that we need for survival today.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that there is, and I know you do, but do you feel like the dichotomy that we have oftentimes, the two opposing worldviews, the either or mentality of either something is spiritual or it's corporate, that either or thinking paralyzes us from being able to move forward?
Absolutely it does. And it's that culture thing, you know, go back. The church very often has this not only maintenance-minded culture, but we have this spiritual versus them, I guess is a better way.
It's either spiritual or it's intellectual, but it can't be both.
Spiritual or the world.
Right.
It's worldly or it's spiritual.
Right.
It's corporate or it's ministry. And we do that dichotomy, as you say, and we separate those, and one dare not cross the other. Now, that has changed because that's what I came up against, you know, in the 1980s, 90s, and early, you know, right before the year 2000, I would say. And then something changed. And I think the thing that changed, and it's the reason why I change, and a lot of times the reason why you change, any of us change, is that we're forced to change.
Nice.
You know, something comes up in our way. I heard it said this way, and we'll probably unpack this a lot as we move forward because it's a huge part of my life looking back. How did I get to where I am? Through a lot of rejection. You know, it hurt.
Yeah.
When you get up in front of 90 to 100 pastors in Tennessee, you know, way back in 80 something, and you've got all this stuff you want to share, and you know that it's going to change and rock their world in a good way. And one of your best friends stands up in the back and says, "This is ridiculous. Why are you bringing this corporate stuff into the church?" And does it
publicly.
Publicly.
Yeah. Ouch.
You know, and it just rattled me. It shook me to my core. And it became, I realized that, well, this is part of the culture of the church right now, and I had to pull back big time. The church wasn't ready for it.
So that the culture then wasn't ready to receive that kind of conversation.
That's right.
What is it that shifts culture? And then I have another question about culture. But what is it that helps culture shift? Is it necessity?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was the necessity. And I have some teaching and some training in the new LeaderLabs, the leadership dashboard that I do, that talks about the inflection points. And I've looked at the history of the inflection points that go all the way back to biblical content and then in history. But then most, in more recent history, looking back into the early 1900s and then following that through, to follow the inflection points that got the church to where it is, that created the subculture, if you will.
The subculture, that's powerful. Yeah,
Yeah, the subculture of the church, because at one time the church was the culture in the United States. The founding fathers and so on and so forth, there's that great debate whether or not they were or weren't. It's my opinion that they were.
Same.
Very much Christian and based on Christian principles and foundations this country was. But then we got to around 1900, and then we got right over here into the little town of Dayton, Tennessee, just a few miles from where we're sitting today, and the monkey trial. And the big battle, they called it the monkey trial because it was the battle over evolution and creationism. And so we won right over there in that courtroom. Creationism won the battle in terms legalistically at that moment in that day over evolution, but we lost the war because from that day forward, Christians realized and said they didn't want to be criticized like that. They didn't want to debate like that. They didn't want to be confronted like that. They didn't like that experience. We weren't used to that experience. We weren't used to having to give someone an answer for the hope that is within us. And looking back at it, I think that was one of the biggest inflection points that caused the church, and I believe I can make the argument that from that day forward, we pulled back and created, think about it, our Christian schools, we created our bookstores, our radio stations.
We withdrew from society.
A mighty fortress is our church, not our God, but as our church. And we became maintenance-minded. And here's the subtle thing I think that the enemy did to us, was that he caused us to begin to see the world as the enemy.
Right.
And the very ones that Jesus called us to save, to redeem, to reach, all of a sudden became our enemy.
Right. We're supposed to be in it, not of it. We don't want to be of it or in it.
Neither one. And we lived that. We created a culture that separated that. Now, the real big change started coming somewhere around 1980, Ronald Reagan and more of a conservative movement in the United States. And there were a lot of inflection points that led up to that. But then all of a sudden, with the moral majority and some of the other conservative movements, Christian nationalism, a lot of people call it, I don't necessarily see that as negative. It's nuanced in and of itself. But we all of a sudden stepped out of our subculture and wanted to speak into the public forum and to say, you guys have taken a left turn with morality and ethics, and you don't believe anymore, and you're not following what our founding fathers said. And the marketplace said, who are you? Where did y'all come from?
Yeah.
Because we had been gone for so long.
For decades.
We had not earned the right to speak into the public forum.
So we're looking back on culture in the 80s and in the 90s and the shift that happened then. Now, it's easy to look back today, right? Because life is lived forward and understood backward, like you were saying. It's easy to look back today on the 80s and in the 90s on what the culture was then and label our strengths and our weaknesses.
Right.
Now, the hard part was back then you were talking in leadership about things that were revealing weaknesses that people bristled at.
Right.
So here's my curiosity. How do we identify the culture, pros and cons, that you're currently in. Because I can look back and identify 20, 30 years, and today everybody will agree with you. But those same people 20, 30 years ago bristled at the idea. So what advice would you give to, to any leader who's looking at identifying culture but being honest with it? You're going to have a lot of opposition, aren't you? You're going to have a lot of pushback when you want to say the truth.
Yeah, no, you most definitely are. And there's a favorite saying that we've talked about often, and it comes from Max Dupree, Leadership Like Jazz, is in his book, where he says, the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality.
Nice.
Which is a brilliant statement. Man, we can unpack that.
To define reality. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, well, to define reality, to look at, and you mentioned to look at the truth. Well, what is the truth? That's a big question today. What is the truth? And we have to start defining reality at several levels of analysis. We have to look at it on a personal level. We have to look at it on a group level. We have to look at it on a much larger denominational level, on a societal level. What is reality? And you hear this a lot. You hear it from one side, from the left, you hear it from the right, and people saying, well, they're just not living in reality. That this is just not reality. Well, how do we define reality? Well, it starts with introspection. It starts with self-awareness, which is foundational to everything I teach. I believe it is the fundamental, prerequisite, foundational for all Christian growth, maturity, leadership development, and Christian formation. Self-awareness.
Self-awareness. Wasn't there a study that was done, I can't remember if it was by Barna or who was it by, where they asked people, they interviewed them, what percentage of people thought that they were self-aware? And then after they ran a series of questions, they found out that like a very small percentage of people were actually self-aware.
Yeah, less than 30%
Yeah.
of the general population are people that would, in the true definition of self-awareness, knowing enough about yourself
Right.
to lead others, would really be self-aware. Most people are living without awareness.
Right.
It's kind of like driving without awareness.
But they believe that they are aware while they're not.
Oh, most definitely. They're not there, but they don't know they're not there.
Yeah, which is such a tremendous danger. Because if you think you're aware and you're not aware, the things that hurt you aren't the things that you know that you don't know. They're the things that you don't know.
That's right.
Those are the things that blindside you.
Yeah. And that's a good statement. There are things called blind spots. And it's hard work, self-work, self-development, to get to that place to where you begin to see the blind spots and to know the things that could derail you or that are self-sabotaging you. Because it's not the devil. Flip Wilson many years ago, as I was growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, was an African-American comedian, and he became world famous by saying, the devil made me do it. And that was his favorite phrase.
Nice.
And I think we use that as a crutch today. Well, the devil made me do it.
Yeah.
Whenever we get caught with our hand in the cookie jar, well, it wasn't my fault. That's really not me. Well, here's reality for you. According to Jesus, it is you. That's why you did it.
Yep.
And that's part of defining reality. Until you're willing to take a real hard look at yourself. I like to say it this way. A few moments of brutal self-honesty is worth a lifetime of self-deception.
A few moments of brutal self-honesty is worth a lifetime of self-deception.
It's worth more than a lifetime of self-deception. Yeah, because many people, we wouldn't call it self-deception. It's just lack of awareness.
Right.
We're going through life and we're not thinking. And of course, one of my favorite sayings and sound bites in teaching and training is leaders think. Leaders think. They're aware. And one of the great philosophers of history said the unreflective life is not worth living.
The unreflective life is not worth living. What a powerful statement.
It's so powerful. But it gets to this thing of living life unaware, of not being self-aware or unaware. And there are lots of, once you begin to unpack this, you can begin to see the connection and the correlation of a lot of very wise statements and colloquial statements that have been given by some of our parents, grandparents, and some of our families of origin,
Right.
where they say, take the time to smell the roses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, roses are all around us, but we're just not aware of it. And here's the way I like to describe it. We've all had this experience from some time where we got in our car or our truck, our vehicle, and we drove somewhere. And then you pull into the driveway or your destination, and all of a sudden it comes to you. You come to yourself, and you realize, I don't remember driving here.
Right.
I think everybody's had that experience.
Of course.
And when you first have that experience, it should be a little bit unsettling.
Right.
Because I don't even remember getting here. So you were talking on the phone, you were singing worship songs, you were thinking about something, but you were distracted.
Yeah.
You were somewhere else, but you have this uncanny ability to continue functioning in some way to just get done what has to get done.
And you followed all the traffic laws. You stopped at all the, I mean, I hope you did, you know, but the point is you were able to function the whole way through, not like you're asleep, but actually functioning, driving a vehicle, not risking your life, and you don't remember any of it.
Yeah. And actually it is, it has a name, and it's driving without awareness. It is a subconscious ability to do one thing while you're actually present somewhere else. And we have that. And what I like to liken it to, and now having taught this for some time and experienced it myself, because there was a time where I did life that way. I wasn't thinking. My head was in the sand. That's the other metaphor and the other visually intelligent graphic I like to grab hold of. Say, some people live with their head in the sand, and we have a saying for it, right? Ignorance is bliss.
Right.
And you will actually have some people, if you start telling them the truth, they will say, hold it. I really don't want to hear that. That's not something I want to hear. It's not something I need to hear. And then you and I, especially if you've been in the ministry for a while, or if you've been a counselor, or you've had kids or grandkids, and you're just trying to share some experience or some enlightenment or some wisdom, some nugget that they need, and they don't want to hear it.
Right.
But you give them that pushback and say, but you need to hear this, you know? And it's like the prodigal son in the New Testament, where Jesus was telling this great story. And he comes to this place, what I call a bifurcation point in his life, a fork in the road, where a decision point has to be made. It's another inflection point, a watershed moment in his life. And it says he came to himself.
Right, right.
And I think there are times in our lives, in our own journey of self-awareness. And this is what self-awareness is. It is a journey. And the scripture, while it is a leadership constant, it is a leadership principle. And that's one of those aha moments, those epiphany moments in my own life when I leaned back in the chair and said, why hasn't anyone helped me to connect this dot?
Yeah.
About self-awareness.
Yeah.
Come to yourself. Realize what you're doing, that life is passing you by, and that you need to be more reflective. You need to be, and here's the word, you need to be more intentional.
Yeah, that's really it.
About what you're doing.
Yeah, that's really it. That intentionality. You know, one of my closest friends in the world is this gentleman that's led worship for me at all of the events that we've done together. His name's John DeBrea. And he left the Romanian church for a season, and he went to a really, really successful American church. And I asked him after the first year, I said, what do you notice that's different? I mean, you're swimming in one set of waters, now you're swimming in different waters. And he goes, I could sum up the biggest change that I've noticed in one word. I go, what is it? He goes, intentionality. And he goes, there's just everything they do, there's intentionality behind it. Now, he was just comparing his two experiences. I'm not saying all of American churches are that way or all Romanian. But my point is, you know, when I became a Christian, even before I became a Christian, my entire goal in life was to live a life that was worth living. That's all I ever wanted. I just want to live a life that I can look back on and say, yeah, that was worth it. I'd do that again, you know? And the statement that you gave me is an unreflective life is not worth living. Yeah. And it's so true that the natural pursuit of purpose and value and a sense of meaning begins with reflection. Yeah. And so I always challenge people in introspectiveness to be intentional in being brutally honest with themselves. That's the terminology that I end up kind of using a lot, is just that brutal honesty. You have to be honest. Who we are is not what we say. It's not even what we believe we believe. Who we are is what we do.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
We were having a conversation, Justin, myself, and a couple of other guys. And one of the guys that was in our group, we were just talking about discipline and the value of, self-discipline. And he goes, oh man, dude, discipline's so important to me. I love self-discipline. Like, it just makes such a difference. And we all kind of got quiet. And I looked at him and I just said, bro, what are you talking about? I mean, your car's the dirtiest out of all of ours. Your room is the dirtiest out of, like, what? You're not on time. You're like, where in your life do you see discipline? And he's like, well, it's a goal of mine. But it was a point of awareness where he could either sit there and go, no, you know what? It's right. I do desire discipline, but I'm not a disciplined person. Or he could lie to himself and be mad at me and so on. But because he's a good, godly, introspective man, he looked at it and he said, you know what? I need to make some changes. And he made some changes, which we were very proud of him for. But the point is so often I think that we get caught up in this silly idea that we believe that we have certain beliefs. But if the actions aren't there, we don't actually have those beliefs.
Yeah.
That's like me telling you that I believe that I am a doctor. Doesn't make me a doctor.
Right.
I believe in Jesus, but I live in a completely sinful way. Then I don't really believe in Jesus. You know? I mean, it's evidenced by the way that we live. Yeah. It's the proof of it. Like if I believe that there's a car coming at me at a rapid rate of speed, I will showcase my belief by moving.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah. Now, if I claim that I believe and I don't move, and I don't really believe that. And so this is so imperative, even for our listeners, to understand that the journey begins with self-awareness. I had learned in the counseling class, and then you taught me. I learned in the counseling class that for change to happen, one, you have to admit you have a problem, you have to be teachable, and you got to do the work. Right. And I remember having this conversation with you about it. And you said, you said a phrase that has stuck with me for the last 4 years now. You said, Eddie, awareness is curative. Yeah. And I just thought to myself, man, that's so true. Just being aware of your problem is already curing the problem. Right. Because then you could be teachable about how to change it, and then you could do the work and change. Right. And then you said to me, you're like, no, you don't understand. Not only is awareness curative, it is disproportionately curative. Yes. 70% of the problem is just being aware of the problem. Right. And it's already being fixed just by you admitting, just by you confessing the sin, the brokenness, the shortcoming, the whatever it is. And so that has been so life-altering in my life, and I have repeated it so many times all over this country. Yes. Yeah. Now, awareness is very much curative.
Well, what we're talking about here is really at the core of this thing we call culture.
Nice.
It's all a part of it, the values. Values are so important. Values are what's important to us. And that's wrapped up in this living life unreflectively, living life with this unawareness, living life without purpose, just going through the motions of life. But, it's like we said with this other quote, and as most people, the majority of people are living life unaware, but they don't realize they're unaware.
Right.
So they don't know what they don't know. And the story that you made with your good friend here who says, well, discipline's important to me, and then you did the right thing, but you also had the change in your pocket to be able to make that confrontational statement. We can't do that with everybody.
No, we had the relationship.
You had the relationship. You've made those idiosyncratic credit deposits into his emotional and life bank account to where at some point in time you can make a withdrawal. That's another great point that a lot of us don't realize. We want to thrust our opinion on somebody, but we haven't, or upon society, but we haven't did the work.
Right.
We haven't earned the right to speak. It just like when we came out of our subculture one day and said, hey, we want to change you. The society is not doing right. Well, this individual says, well, I appreciate and I love discipline, but it was evident to everybody else around him, that What? What did you just say? Do you realize what that word means?
Yeah.
Because your life does not exemplify that.
Right.
But that is so where so many people are. And I've been there. And I think that, once was blind, but now I see. And that should help us to be considerate, because when we talk about this thing called values, and he exemplifies it so beautifully, we talk about two kinds of values: aspirational values or actual values.
Aspirational or actual values.
That's right.
Unpack that for me a little bit.
When we get into the study of values, and when we get into the study of culture, values are really what's under the waterline. Let's think of values in terms of an iceberg.
Okay.
And you've got the waterline. Well, most of what is seen of an iceberg, only about 10% of it is seen above the waterline. And the rest of it, 90%, is underneath the water. You don't see it. But it's what's underneath the water that is the substance and the bulk of an iceberg.
Right.
And so in culture, what it is, behavior is what's above the waterline. It's that 10%. But it's the 10% that will sink you. It is the 10% that will sabotage you. But it is also the 10% and only the 10% that people see. People don't see your values. They don't see your beliefs. They don't see your intentions. And it's crazy because we judge others by their behavior. We judge ourselves by the intentions.
Always.
What's underneath the waterline. But it's those values, the true, authentic values are underneath the waterline. And so we say, well, he's saying, well, I appreciate and I really like this thing called discipline, but his behavior is disqualifying him from that value.
Right.
So what he's done is he's looking at an aspirational value. For instance, in LeaderLabs, I will say to people sometimes when I'm doing the cultural lab, I will say, write down for me your top 5 values. And they start writing. And within 2 or 3 minutes, they've got them written. I said, now tear that up because that's not the truth. Those are your aspirational values. Now I want you to think about what your true values are. What do you really value? What's really important to you? And I want you to qualify those with your checkbook and your calendar.
That's it. What do you spend on? Because that's what you actually value.
That's exactly right. And Eleanor Roosevelt said it, show me your checkbook, I'll show you what you care about.
Yeah.
But Jesus said it even better. He said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be.
Yeah.
And he also said, it's not what you think it is, the words that you say, the behaviors that you do, because people will say when they're caught with their hand in the cookie jar or they get caught in a sinful situation, their life's falling apart, they'll say, but you don't realize it's not really me. And then someone has to look back and tell them the brutal truth, but it is you, or you wouldn't have done it.
So this is a perfect example of people that think they're self-aware, but are not self-aware.
Perfect example. And they're looking at aspirational value. It's something that you should be acting upon, but you're not acting upon it. For instance, let's give a couple examples.
Yeah.
And this is going to sting for a lot of people, so hold on. As Paul said, don't make me your enemy because I tell you the truth.
Right.
But, tithing, if you get into the pulpit, if you've been a pastor for a while and you ask your congregation, any congregation, how many of you tithe, believe in tithing? And about 90 to 100%, if they're awake, are going to raise their hand.
And they believe in it.
They believe in it. They will say they do it. They will raise their hand in public and say they do it. But the statistics are way off.
Yeah.
Because way less than 50% of the general population who claim to tithe actually tithe. But we do know this, those that do tithe usually give disproportionately above a tithe. But most people will aspire to tithing.
Right.
One day I'm going to tithe. I know that one day I'll be rich enough. One day I'll be, out of debt enough. One day. They're aspiring. So that's aspirational. How many of you believe in prayer? They'll do the same thing.
Right.
Everybody raise their hand. But we know from experience and from the data that very few people actually ever get on their knees in private and pray, or get into a small place and really pray. And we'll put that off and say, well, I pray when I'm thinking, I pray when I'm driving, I
Right.
pray, all this, and that counts, right? You're thinking about the Lord, but it's not the same thing as saying how many of you pray, and everybody raise their hand. Well, it's aspirational. But once you get to the place to where you have that moment of brutal self-honesty, and you say to yourself, my behavior does not correlate with what I say I believe. And then it leads to another correlation and another aha moment and epiphany where you realize, oh my gosh, this is what most of what Jesus was preaching and teaching.
Yes.
Is that your behavior is what really speaks truth to the fact that you believe what you say you believe. And then James and Paul come along and they have this huge theological debate. And they end up, if you follow it through, they both are saying the same thing.
Right.
But it shows the correlation between faith and your behavior.
Right.
And one says, well, hey, I'm a great faith guy. I'm a faith preacher. I'm a faith person. And then Paul walks in the room and says, well, show it to me.
Mm-hmm.
Show it to me. Where's the fruit of that?
Right.
Where's the result of that? Where's the behavior? And I guess if there's one place where the Lord has brought, I'll say it to him, it's where I am in LeaderLabs right now is focusing. In fact, I've got a book I'll be coming out with early next year called clarity.
Wow.
And it's got clarity between belief and behavior.
Fantastic.
On that one subject, because it's such a big thing in this issue of self-awareness, and it's where the Lord really wants us to get to. And in Scripture, Jesus was always talking about fruit.
Right.
Fruit. Well, fruit is product. Fruit is result. Fruit is the end, not the means, but the end. And Jesus, when he only did one thing in life, then you ought to think about it, because it was something that he was kind of really emphasized. And the only thing that Jesus ever cursed was a fig tree.
Right.
And why did he do it?
It failed to bear fruit.
Failed to bear fruit. And if you look back at everything he had to say about fruit and the importance of a fruit and how good trees bring forth good fruit, bad trees bring forth bad fruit, and how he really emphasizes this thing of fruit and how important it is, and that not only we have fruit, but that our fruit would remain, that it would be something of substance.
Right.
What he's talking about is, your behavior. Your behavior is a fruit of what's underneath the waterline of the those values that you believe. So now I say to my people, now go back and rewrite those 5 and be honest with yourself and say, where are my resources? Where do I spend my time? And now just write it down.
Yeah.
And then come to the Lord with honesty and say, Lord, this is who I really am. Now help me to change my want to.
Yeah.
So that I can become the person that I think I am. In fact, it's interesting, and I say this in my self-awareness labs, my clarity labs, is that in San Francisco, Shirley and I went out, and she was touring San Francisco. This was, 10, 15 years ago, and I was in this training for arguably one of the top assessments in the country or the world. And going into their state-of-the-art training facility, there was a print on the wall as you walked in, and it said, you couldn't miss it. It said, come get to know the you that everyone else knows. And it just, stuck with me, because we have a story that we're telling ourselves about ourselves, and we're biased with that. But very often that story is only partially true. And so we have to have some other mechanism, some other intentionality.
Right.
To break through that bias that causes us to take our head out of the sand and come to ourselves and get to a place to where we are not only willing, but we're anxious to say, Lord, help me to see me so that I can become real. So, and I know it's a core value of you
Yeah.
and this podcast.
Yeah, 100%.
Authenticity.
100%.
And you can't be authentic if you don't know you. Just be
Right.
you. You asked me coming, when we got here, are you okay with these questions? And all the questions that you were going to ask me were about me. And I said, well, if I'm not okay with you asking me questions about me, then, I didn't have to prepare a whole lot because I should be an expert on me.
Right.
But many people aren't an expert on them.
They're an expert on what they aspire to be,
There you go.
but they're not an expert on themselves.
On the actual
Yes.
value.
Yeah.
So there's that aspirational versus the actual value. And Jesus tried to make that departmentalization, if you will, and say, listen, you're aspiring to something, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You should. But the actual is that disconnect,
Yes.
that juxtaposition between your aspiration and your behavior. And that's where the discipline comes in.
Yes.
That's where the self-control comes in. That's where what I call the self-leadership and the self-management comes in. And that's where our friend says, well, I love this self-discipline thing, but everybody looks at him and says, yeah, but look at this, 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 and this. And Jesus was constantly bringing people to that realization.
100%. Well, once you notice it, you see it all throughout Scripture.
Everywhere.
Yeah. No, I think that the biggest hindrance for growth is that disconnect between who am I really and who do I believe that I am.
That's right.
That disconnect is, I think, the biggest hindrance to growth.
Right.
Why are people? So I have several questions I want to ask you now. Just to add on to that statement that I made, that is the biggest hindrance. I think that humility positions you in a place where you can be really honest with yourself.
True.
And I think that pride will completely blind you from seeing yourself for who you are. And that's why, humility in a practical sense is extremely important. It's not just abracadabra biblical magic to say, oh, I'm not really all that great. And, now we're lying again, pretending with that false sense of humility. Oh, brother, it wasn't me. It was the Lord. And, but the question that I have is, why do you think people are afraid to be honest about who they are? What hinders us from being honest and taking an honest look at ourselves in the mirror?
Well, I think fundamentally the answer to the question at the end of the day is it is the human condition after the fall. It is the fruit. It is the result of what took place in our humanity. It is our default mode.
It is Adam in the garden when the Lord said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I hid, for I was naked."
Yeah, and I put it into two columns. It is the self-protection and self-promotion mode. Or which is the ego mode, the pride mode.
The pride, yeah.
Then there is the humility and confidence in God mode, the humility and confidence in God column. So if you look at those two columns, I think by default, most of us, and it's a survival thing, most of us in the culture that we live in, and another analogy, another way of looking at culture, the water you swim in, is the fishing analogy. And it's interesting that Jesus used that to talk about we would become fishers of men. And I look at that when I'm teaching culture, and I say, well, they were fishermen and they actually caught fish, but he took that analogy that that experience that they were so familiar with, and turned it on its head and said, yeah, but this is the way the kingdom is. You're going to be fishing for men. In other words, they are in a water that they're swimming in.
Nice.
As a fish. And that's all they know. But your job is going to be to have a bait that attracts them. And you are going to hook them. And you are going to jerk them out of their culture. And it's a beautiful analogy when you think about metaphor of what happens when a person comes to know the Lord and they have this unbelievable experience, right? Of coming to know him. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. Think about blind and then see. And we pull them out of that culture into the air that we breathe. And it is so totally diametrically different the water that they're in, now this fish is going to have to learn to exist in a totally different context, in a totally different environment.
Yeah.
And when we are pulled out of that, Scripture again tells us in Romans that, or in the New Testament, it says to us that if any person be in Christ, they are a new creation.
Wow.
The old things pass away, and behold, all things become new. The old culture that you lived in dies, or it should. It should be put to death. And that's the way that he talks about it. The flesh needs to be put on a cross, and it needs to die constantly. It's not a one-time thing. Discipline and discipleship are connected, and
Yes.
you're constantly putting something, little deaths of something,
Yeah.
once you begin to grow and mature. And so we come to know Christ. We find ourselves in an excited, we're enthusiastic beginners, to use another term that I like. We're in developmental level 1 of a new culture, a new life, and we're so excited about it. And we are by default, when we're brought into that new world, jerked out of the water as a fish into this new world of Christianity and this new life in Christ, it's humility and confidence in God.
Yeah.
Because God is so big and so wonderful and so magnificent, and I'm so in love with him, and I have such confidence in him. And we all remember it, everybody listening to us. If you've experienced, you know what it's like to be that fresh new Christian and to think, man, this is great. And the Lord now has his hand of favor on me, and I can do anything.
Right.
And we believe naively, but we believe that. But it is that faith that so impresses God, right?
Yeah.
And again, that dynamic tension of being childlike, but having to grow up, but he doesn't ever want us to lose that portion of that.
Right.
But now we've got this humility. We're very humble. We realize where we came from. Now we're in this new life. And we've got this confidence in God. But what happens as we begin to grow, life takes place.
Yeah.
Life happens. And this is where I have my talk, where it says the 8 things I learned after I got saved.
Right.
And that's where the defining reality comes into bear again, and how important that phrase and that principle is, because that's a journey too. You don't ever get to where you've defined all of reality.
No.
I think it's a constant defining of reality as we grow and
There's
learn.
always room to learn, to grow, to
Move
change.
through seasons.
Yeah,
right?
move through seasons, exactly.
You think you had it all worked out. Now all of a sudden you're in a different one. But life happens, and things begin to happen, and it begins to, as Scripture says, but we forget this, it begins to test our faith. Our faith gets tested. Examine yourself, test yourself to see whether you're in the faith. Is my behavior really backing up my belief?
There's that introspectiveness.
It is the introspective and reflectiveness that comes with it, the brutal honesty of constantly coming to grips with who I am. And we come to these various bifurcation points, forks on the road at different seasons of our life, where we are confronted with a choice. Will I live in this column or that column? Will I continue to take this road or that road? Will I continue to walk with humility and confidence in God? Or will I decide to take the road of self-protection and self-promotion, which are really pride
Yes.
and ego?
Yes.
Pride and ego. Pride says, I need to promote myself. God, it's not good enough to leave it into the hands of the Lord.
Right.
We believed at first that he was going to take us where he wanted, our life's going to go where he wants us to go. But then something happens and we get rejected.
Yeah.
And or it doesn't go our way, and we decide we need to take control again.
Right.
And if we're not careful, we get on that road, and we will live not only weeks and years, we'll live decades.
Wow.
With self-promotion and self-protection. And it was, I like to refer to it like the old fathers of history called it, the dark night of the soul is where that ends up.
Yeah.
The dark night of the soul.
It is so hard when so coming to that bifurcation point, when you realize this, when I realized it, going back through Scripture, I see it constantly. I feel like Jesus is constantly talking to whatever crowd he's talking to, whoever he's speaking to, and he's shining a light. into a corner that none of them want to admit or look at, where he's revealing their culture to them.
Right.
And instead of sitting there and spending the time and going, well, let me sit here and try to convince you, he just goes, look, for those of you who have ears, let them hear. If you get it, you get it, essentially is what he's saying. Because he's not going to step over your will to try to, force you into believing. It's like, look, you have to choose, but I'm going to tell you the truth. And so he tells them the truth, and then he walks away. And then people have to choose, because there is a cognitive dissonance that happens. I've seen this in my life. I've seen it in people that I've discipled for years, where they have what they want, right? Like let's take your aspirations, right? I aspire to believe, that my aspire to believe, I have this aspiration to be really disciplined. And then there's reality that I'm not.
Right.
And when you have both of these beliefs, they contradict one another, because one says I'm not disciplined. The other one's I aspire to be disciplined. And I really like the identity of being disciplined without the work.
Yeah.
And so then I have to do one of two things. I either have to be brutally honest with myself and say, okay, I aspire to that, but I'm not that.
That's right.
Right. Or two, I have to create some sort of false reality, some sort of justification, some sort of coping mechanism. A lot of times what it turns into is, if you're the one who shines the light in this separation, I will attack you.
That's right.
And I will attack you to silence the voice that is your voice in my mind, forcing me to look at this thing, because it's creating such a dissonance in my mind.
Right.
And so all throughout Scripture, I see that Jesus does this consistently and continually. So when it comes to us, where growth happens, it comes in that brutal honesty where we're willing to be honest and transparent with ourselves.
So true. So true. This is why self-awareness is so key.
Yes.
To us growing from weak to being strong, from the milk, what Bible, the
right.
Christian truth says, from the milk of the word to the meat of the word, and growing. And we give it such pushback, and we have to be constantly brought back to the altar, to where, ego is edging God out.
Nice.
But the ego has to be altered, literally changed.
Nice.
But continually brought back to the altar, so that we will not allow ourselves, because the flesh wants to self-promote and self-protect.
Right.
It is by default. It is the path that is so easily chosen. But what did the great author say? This is the path least chosen. And that's the path of discipleship, the path of self-leadership, self-protection. Jesus said there are two ways. There's the broad way, and then there's the narrow way, and you get to choose which way and I've constantly in my life been on this journey of trying to stay, Lord, help me to stay on that narrow road. Help me to keep choosing to keep me under the blood, is the way we like to call it in our Christian culture, and it's a good term. Keep me under the blood. Keep me in the faith, Lord. And help me so that I don't let my ego run amok. Don't let Fred go his own way. Help me, Lord, to continue to remain humble, to continue to remain confident in you, and that you really do have your hand on my life, and that you have a plan and a purpose for me.
So if the mechanism of self-awareness, brutal honesty, introspectiveness, through the process of introspectiveness, if that mechanism, which leads to transformation and growth in our lives, if that mechanism is activated or inactivated based on our positioning, the way that we view ourselves and so on, then would it be a fair statement to say that the precursor for growth is whether or not you're humble and your confidence is in God, or if you're proud and you have an ego, that's going to be the determining factor as a precursor to a place of being able to even be introspective and then have the mechanism of self-awareness activate so you can grow.
Yeah. In fact, Jesus actually said it in my servant leadership lab from Matthew chapter 20 and verse 20, where I call it 2020 leadership. And the antecedent to that whole story and the prescription that Jesus gave us about leadership there. I like what he says. He calls all of his disciples to him, and he says, if you want to be great, then you must serve. And if you want to be first, then you must become the servant to others, even as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. And then, of course, Paul comes back in Philippians chapter 2, a template that you can lay perfectly over that as if he had heard that oral tradition, and now he's speaking more detail and content into that prescriptive talk that Jesus gave. But let's just look at that for a moment because his implications are powerful. In Matthew chapter 20, if you want to be great, megos is the original word. If you want to be larger than life, if you want to leave a legacy, and many of us talk about that. I want to leave a legacy.
Right.
But I want it to be an intentional legacy, not an unconscious legacy. Stephen Covey says in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of his 7 habits and principles is this, to write down your obituary ahead of time, which is kind of a morbid thought. But what he's saying is this: begin with the end in mind. Where do you want to go? And then begin to live every day, every day, every day, every day, so that someone will say that about you at the end of your life. Why? That my behavior was that which people saw. Because, see, we have identity. Identity is what we think of ourselves. That's a story we're playing between our ears that may or may not be true. We're probably self-deceiving and self-sabotaging because we're on the path of self-promotion and self-protection. We got off the path of humility and confidence in God somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And so we're over here on this road and we really don't realize it. But that says to me, if you understand where you want to end up, and if you want to be great, if you want to leave a legacy, and I like those terms, if you want to. The implication there is about ambition. If you want it. Well, that's ambition. I wouldn't give you a plug nickel for somebody who doesn't have ambition.
Right.
But we often think of ambition as being some negative thing, right?
Right.
It's terrible. It's kind of like capitalism. It's all terrible. Well, it depends.
Right.
There's never really the easy answer. The defining reality of all of these things are much more nuanced than that. You have to think, right?
Yeah.
And so if I want to be great, if I want to leave a legacy, if I want to be, and then he comes back and he says, all right, and if you want to be first, and he uses a totally different word in the Koine Greek, where that original language, where he says, if you want to be protos, if you want to be first, if you want to be at the top of the pyramid. Well, why do I think he said that? Because the antecedent of that story was, he said, you know how the Gentiles lead. You know how the world does it, you know how the corporate world does it, you know how the marketplace does it. They exercise authority over you and they lord it over you. He gave us that pyramid Roman style of leadership, says command and control, top down, command and control. But these 4 words changed everything. Not so with you.
Not so with you.
Not so with you. We're supposed to be different. And it amazes me because in my labs, all I do is unpack the scripture in Matthew 20 and Philippians chapter 2. And I have preachers that have preached this stuff for decades come to me and crying and say, I've just altered my ego again. I just came to myself because how easily it is. Well, and the Bible says that your heart, remember Jesus said this is where it all comes from. Ambition comes from the heart.
Right. Our
driving forces, our motivators come from our heart. He says what's in your heart causes you to say what you say, do what you do.
Right. Out of the overflow
and
of the
only
heart.
Christ, our founding fathers knew this. It's not laws that's going to change things. It's morality. It's your heart, Christianity. And they believed that Christianity was the only thing that could change an individual or a society's heart.
Yeah.
And so we got to get back to that. But Jesus was saying to us, he didn't chastise anybody for having ambition. What he did was, by implication, he said, just make sure your ambition is founded on the right principles and the right, here we go, values.
Yes. Not your aspired values, your actual values.
The kingdom.
Yes.
Kingdom values. Right?
Yeah.
And so we have to get back. And so, I look at it and I say, all right, if you really want to live a great life, and what he said was, you need to be serving. Well, that's behavior. Serve. Well, how am I going to do that? And if you want to be first, if you want to be political, in societal's sense of the word, if you want to be political in the church's denominational sense of the word. And we would truly have our head in the sand to think that the church and society don't have political aspects and political cultures. It's both there. And he said it's not bad if you want to have ambitions for both. But regardless of your ambition, it is foundational that you really do introspection and figure out your motivation.
Right.
And the only way you're going to know that is by your behavior. Your behavior, your fruit's going to tell you whether you've got the right motivation or not. And that is, are you serving?
Yeah.
And he said, of all people, I could have come and, lived in kingdoms and castles and so on and so forth, but I didn't. I laid down my life and I served.
Yeah, he came not to be served, but to serve. And if anybody had the entitlement or the justification to do it,
that's right,
to be served, it would be Jesus.
And here's the problem with us. The higher up the organizational ladder we go, even in the church, even in Christianity, the less likely it is we're going to receive honest feedback. The less likely it is that we are going to be in an environment where people actually speak truth to us like you spoke to your friend.
Right. Because you're afraid this person who's over you may not favor you anymore, may take something away from you, may attack you in some way, may marginalize you. You're afraid of punishments for honesty.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and the reality is a lot of times there is punishments for honesty.
Well, true. And one person said to his best friend once he got to that place, and of course he was still down here among the rest of us, he looked at his best friend and said, "Congratulations, you just heard truth for the last time." Because even now, your best friend, I can't speak it to you anymore. Right. Because possibly you got my paycheck. You've got my benefits. You've got my career. You've got all this in your hand. And all of those things, first responsibility is to define reality. Listen, you have to define reality, in whatever culture and whatever context and whatever path you choose, there are consequences that come with it. It's like picking up a stick. Right. When you pick up one end, you automatically pick up the other end. And that's the way our decisions are, our bifurcation points are in life. And so it's so important that we continually understand. And I guess this is a good point for me to just say why the four principles and presuppositions are that I use in LeaderLabs, because it fits so well here.
Oh, I know these. I know them well.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
And for those of you that don't know, Brother Eddie here has been certified and trained in almost everything that LeaderLabs has. And so we've walked, and he's one of those guys that I've been able to, and proudly so, mentor and be a protege, and I'm just so proud of what he's doing. But
thank you.
Of all of let's start with the presuppositions. We believe that a healthy church is the hope of the world.
Right.
And we use that adjective healthy on purpose, intentionally. Healthy churches, because not all churches are healthy.
That's the truth.
Some are toxic.
Yeah.
But we want healthy churches, and that's a goal of LeaderLabs, and it's a goal of the Multiply podcast.
Of course.
That we have influence to create healthy. And then the second presupposition in that list is, and healthy leaders are the hope of the church. So if we're going to have healthy churches, we need to have healthy leaders.
Yeah. You're not going to have a healthy church if you don't have a healthy leader.
No. Everything, John Maxwell said it this way: everything rises or falls on leadership.
Yeah. And that's the law of the lid in the 21 to Feel the
law of the lid. Yeah. And a shout out to John Maxwell, because look at all the decades that he has been. And when I first started trying to do what I do with leadership and these things, John Maxwell was really starting to take off. His rocket was exploding, and he was beginning to lead the way, of which a lot of us now who see this stuff have stepped on his shoulders.
Oh yeah,
to a great extent. But he says in the law of the lid, everything begins and falls. It stops with leadership.
Yeah.
As Roosevelt said, the buck stops here.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, you have to be accountable for that. So healthy leaders are the hope of the church. So presupposition number 3 is, but there is a leadership crisis in the marketplace and in the ministry. And here we go. We're defining reality. You've got to admit that there is a crisis of leadership. I remember years ago reading a Time magazine front page, and it said, the world is looking for leadership, but it will accept much less.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's so true.
Isn't it true?
What a true statement. Yeah.
And you hear people saying it today.
Yeah. Oh,
Well,
yeah.
why do you vote for this? Why do you vote for that? Who did you vote for? And you say, well, why did you do that? Well, hey, show me my choices.
That's it. Yeah. Between the two, they were the best, but I don't like either.
Right. Exactly right.
That's become the norm.
But to put your head in the sand and not to vote
Right.
is to make a decision as well.
There's a quote by Napoleon Bonaparte, who has a lot of great quotes. I have had such a good time studying Napoleon Bonaparte. But he says, the leader's role is to first define reality, then to give hope.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's interesting that you would say this, because it's been said that we all get our stuff from somewhere.
Right.
That
Right.
Well, this is originally me. Okay.
Sure it is.
Well, let's go back to defining reality here, brother. You need some brutal honesty there.
Nice.
Because Max Dupree made that quote famous in his book, Leadership Like Jazz, where he says the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. But it was Napoleon who first said it. So he didn't quote Napoleon or didn't give a tribute to, but it was. And Napoleon added that great phrase that I think we should add, and then to give hope.
Yeah.
Why? Because very often when you define your reality, it don't look so good.
No, it doesn't.
It's the very reason why we didn't want to define it.
That's exactly right.
It's why we wanted to keep our head in the sand.
It's the very reason we didn't want to look at it.
I don't want to confront that.
Yeah.
What? I don't want to do the work.
Yeah.
It's work, man. Discipline, discipleship. That's hard work. It means deferred gratification.
Yeah.
It means pushing back on something. It means saying no to me, to some of the things I want.
It also, time also hurts in that situation, because it also means that if I admit that I have a failure in this area, I admit that I've been failing for 20 years in it.
Oh, yeah.
I admit that I have influenced other people to go down the same track. So that's a big pill to swallow.
It's a big one.
Yeah, but that's why you have to look at reality and then give hope.
That's
and
right.
I think that's such a good definition of what healthy discipleship is, healthy pastoring is, healthy being a Christian is. When right? So repentance can't happen until there's confession.
That's right.
Confession is admitting the sin, taking a hard look in that dark corner and going, I'm a sinner. And then the Lord goes, good, now don't sit here. There's hope for redemption. And so you got to define reality and then give hope. And I think that that's the right model for us to follow and to replicate. So no, that's super exciting.
Well, it's why we say the healthy church is the hope of the world. Healthy leaders are the hope of the church. There's a leadership crisis in the marketplace and the ministry. But then presupposition number 4 says that but the answer to that crisis is the church. It is that hope. And we say, well, here's we want to have healthy churches. We want to have healthy leaders. There's a crisis, but then we have to admit the reality of that crisis.
Right.
That crisis is a crisis of character, competence, and credibility.
So there is a crisis of character, of competency, and of credibility.
Yeah, and you have to unpack that because it becomes like a mathematical equation.
Yes.
The physicists of the world would love me right now. They say math tells the truth about anything. But well, let's look at it. Character plus competence equals credibility.
100%.
And I believe that there's a crisis in it all. And I say to people in my lab, and I'll say to our audience today, don't be so quick to answer. But what's the most important, character or competence? And most of the time, in the water we all swim in, we'll blurt out, well, character is most important. But when you take a real good look at it, character is something that it's a perspective that you see over time.
Right.
Because you don't really know if a person's a person of character or not immediately. You can't judge that book by its cover. It takes what you see.
Right.
To help you to decide whether or not they're honest, they have integrity, if you can trust them, if they're loyal. And so that's something over time. But now competence is something that we see almost immediately. Almost immediately, we're self-monitoring, we're looking at a person, and we can tell by the words they speak, by the way they think, by the way they dress,
the conclusions they draw,
by their behavior, the conclusions they draw. We start developing a reputation. We start creating a reputation about them almost from the get-go,
Right.
whether we don't want to or not. And so what I tell people all the time, it falls back to this thing Jesus said was so important to us, behavior, because
Right.
behavior creates your reputation over time, what people see. And it's even your friend, that analogy that you gave. He says, I love discipline. And everybody says, what? Your reputation says just the opposite.
Yeah.
You know, you're not a disciplined person. Come on, get your head out of the sand. And so we have to understand that.
Your identity is who you think you are. Your
right.
reputation is who other people think you are.
What other people, and we hear it all the time. I don't care what other people think about me. Well, hey, okay. you need a dose of brutal self-honesty here. You need to be, you need to have some cold water thrown into your face.
So character and competency, just to give an illustration on both for our listeners, you had said character and competency. Character plus competency equals credibility.
That's right.
And I agree with that statement completely. All of us follow leaders based on both qualities.
Yeah.
Based on character and competency.
That's right.
And in a simple illustration, all of us would follow a leader that has both. None of us would follow a leader that is lacking one of the two.
That's right.
Because if you have a leader who is very competent, but you don't trust their character, you won't follow him.
That's right.
If you have a leader who has a really good character, but they're not competent, they're not capable to do the job of leadership, you might love them, they might be your best friend, but you wouldn't vote them into leadership because they'd be out of their depth.
That's right.
And so you need both character and competency, and then that gives you credibility. And so the fourth presupposition we were talking about, right, was character, competency, credibility, and that we need that for leadership. Let's work that backwards from the fourth to the third to the second to the first.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I put it in that way. And I tell people all the time exactly what you've just said. And here's the way I put it. I said character and competence is like a coin, both sides of the same coin. And if you put that, say you got a quarter in your hand and, we flip that quarter and it's spinning.
Yeah.
That's the reality of the way character and competence should be in our lives. And so I said to people all the time, I said, all right, have you ever worked for someone who didn't have any character or with them? And most everybody has.
Right.
And I said, how'd that feel? And you can just, no, not so good.
Everybody's got
stories. Oh, have you ever worked with or for somebody who wasn't competent?
Oh, dear.
Define it. They didn't know what they were doing.
Yes.
And oh, yes. Oh, how'd that feel? Well, it doesn't feel good at all. So the challenge, and it rolls right back down on us, right? Which is why I developed the 4 principles of leadership, which we'll get to in a moment. Because when you begin to look at that and you begin to become introspective and reflective and brutally honest with your own self, you have to say, am I a person of character? And do I know what I'm doing, right? Because those two things, it's not one or the other. It takes those two things to be a person of credibility.
Yes.
And what is credibility? Credibility is being able to be trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
It is the first principle of being a effective witness for a trial or with a jury. The first thing that a lawyer is going to do is they're going to test your credibility. Are you a believable subject? And if you're not, then you're out. And so let's think about it for a moment. We're supposed to be Christians. We're supposed to be carriers of the gospel, of the good news. What is the good news? That your today does not have to be like yesterday, that your tomorrow does not have to be like today. That is the gospel. That is the good news. That is hope.
Yeah.
That's the basis of this whole thing. Well, we're carriers of that. We are representatives and we are ambassadors of to the world in the very life that we live. And so we have to be credible. So we have to be people of character and competence to have credibility because, why? Why, Dr. Fred? Because if they don't believe the messenger,
right,
they'll never believe our message.
Right.
And this, Brother Eddie, is where we shoot ourselves in the foot. It's why those outside of the kingdom don't want to listen to us. They don't want to hear us. The millennials and the Gen Zs, of which you have an army that follow you, and that's one of the things that have always impressed me about you, is that because they will not stand for anything that is not authentic.
That's right.
They're begging for somebody to stand up and say, will somebody please connect these two principles, character and competence? Well, somebody please be credible here, and they will follow you through hell and back.
That's right.
If you can prove to them you're real and you're authentic.
Yeah, no, you're 100% nail on the head accurate, especially with the Gen Z and the millennial generation. They don't care for your position. They don't care for your title. John Maxwell says that there's multiple levels of leadership, and that the weakest form of leadership is positional leadership. Right. Positional leadership is your boss who is your boss, and you obey him because you have to, not because you want to. You know, relational leadership is where it's at. But at the end of the day, people don't care about your titles. They don't care about your position. They don't care about your degrees. There's a whole 2 generations that have been raised up being lied to consistently.
Right.
If you look at what's on Instagram or everywhere else, everything is AI. Everything is faked.
That's right.
And if you look at, like my parents' generation, they will look at videos and they will not be able to detect what's AI and what's not.
That's right.
But my boy, who's 12, will look at it and go, that's fake. You'll know immediately.
That's right.
And
that's right.
And I'm getting into an age now where I sit there and I wonder, is this AI? Is it not AI? I'll show it to my kid and he'll go, that's not real, Dad.
Yeah.
And it's because, there's that statistic where it says that the millennial generation is the least brand loyal generation. And it's funny because I've heard this at different conferences that we've been to together.
Yes.
Where we've had, speakers say, the millennial generation is the least brand loyal generation. And they'll say that like it's a slight on the millennial generation because they're just not loyal. But nobody's asking why.
Right.
And the reason why is because they have been the generation that brands have been least loyal to.
That's right.
Every DeWalt and everybody else sells out to China, Hewlett-Packard and so on. And you can't be a Ford guy for 30 years anymore. That's because, right. Brands change and everything else. Same thing happened with them in society. What they were promised wasn't delivered. And so now you can come in with credibilities and certifications and everything else, and they look at it and they go, none of that means anything to me because I've been lied to before again and again and again. So credibility on the map makes me not trust you off the map because you don't have it on the map.
That's right.
But if we can have credibility in places where we can prove it in a way that is practical.
That's right.
Not this Christianese mumbo jumbo that we throw out a lot of times. I'm sorry to be so direct, but this Christianese kind of ideology where it's like, well, just say these magic words and then abracadabra, just show up to church and, pay your tithe and do your due diligence and then everything will work out. Well, I have a whole generation or 2 that says we tried these things and it didn't work out. It didn't work out in the practical.
Right.
And that's why I think that these generations are so hungry for a lot of the things that you teach because they're so practical.
That's right.
They go, I read the verse. It doesn't make any sense to me Tuesday when I got to show up to work and deal with my boss. I need something that's real. So when they see that there's actual competency that makes effective practical change, when they see that there's credibility through authenticity and transparency, then you've gained credibility. And when that happens, then that is the change in your pocket, like you say.
That's right.
That's the capital that you've built to where you can say, you know what, I can make a purchase, to where I can say something. And rarely do I say, hey, you're just going to have to trust me on this. Rarely. But I have enough capital to where I can say it and people will go, you've been faithful here, you've been faithful there, you've been competent here, you've had the character there. I see where everything's at on the map. Yeah, I'll trust you off the map.
That's exactly right.
That's the leadership that I think is missing. Remember when back in like the Jesus movement, everything switched from like imperial leadership, top-down leadership to the servant leader, right? Back in like the 70s, 80s, right in there. Everything had switched. I only read about it. Obviously, I wasn't alive at the time. But everything had switched towards the...
And I was. What does that say?
Towards the servant leadership model.
That's right.
But then what's happened, especially within like the millennial and Gen Z generation, you can really see it because they're affected by it, where we've figured out the mechanism. Oh, servant leadership? Great. Well, I'm the director of the organization or the state department or whatever, for our denomination. So I'm going to show up, carry a couple of chairs, make sure that the photographer gets the photos of me carrying the chairs. And then I'm going to be there for 10 minutes. Then I got to run out and do something else just so that way I can get the Instagram photo to show that I'm a servant leader. People smell right through that.
Sure they do.
People see right through that. And now I feel like the next big shift that is coming, and I've been saying this for about a decade, but the next big shift, we went from imperial leadership to servant leadership. And I think that the next big shift in leadership is authentic leadership. Yeah. I think that that's going to be the big shift. Yeah. And I think people are hungry for honest, transparent leaders who aren't just saying sound bites with their radio voice, but they're actually being brutally honest with you because they know how to be brutally honest with themselves.
Yeah.
So sorry, you pulled a thread, and I just kind of fire hydranted you there, but
You're preaching good, brother. Go right ahead. You're bringing me under conviction. I mean, and it is so true. And while I think we're seeing that, it is one of the biggest moves in leadership. It's authentic leadership, and it's one of the things that I say a great deal trying to challenge people. And it is the challenge of this behavioral principle, right, of thinking about behavior. Is that this is really the fruit. This is the telltale examination of whether or not you're in the faith or not. What are your actions? What are your behaviors?
right.
This kind of thing. And the sad thing about it, though, is that a lot of people that have bought into the default mode of what is called servant leadership. It was Robert Greenleaf back in the 70s that made the book Servant Leadership. And it's still a great book. It's one of my favorite books because he's nailed the principles right on the head. And but it's interesting because the academic world says that in the 1970s, Robert Greenleaf from the Greenleaf Center coined the term servant leadership in his new book.
But he didn't.
No, he didn't. In fact, before Jesus even spoke, the servant leadership prescriptive stuff we've been talking about, it goes back to the Old Testament. Scripture was always talking about servant leadership.
Yeah.
It used different terms and different nomenclature, if you will, all throughout Scripture. It was Moses, my servant, Joshua, my servant. Well, I could argue all day long that those were two of the greatest leaders in all of the Old Testament, and yet they weren't referred to as leaders. They were referred to as servants. And then when Jesus was prophesied, of which all those prophecies not only were foretold, but he fulfilled, the greatest in Isaiah was that he would be a servant. Leader, that he would be the suffering servant. Well, boy, you just connected something there to leadership that nobody wants to talk about, and that's suffering. And even in Matthew 20, when the mother of Zebedee brought her two sons to Jesus at the very beginning of that prescriptive passage, she brings her sons to Jesus and says, let one of my boys and the other boy sit on your right hand and on your left. Let one be COO and let one be CEO. Because they still had that same kind of corporate marketplace model, the Roman model in their mind. And Jesus really said something that it would take time to really bring to surface the reality of, but he said, they're going to sit in a place of leadership and they're going to drink from a cup.
Right.
But Mama, you probably don't want to talk about the cup.
The cup of suffering, yeah.
It's the cup of suffering that comes with it. I think this is also where we find ourselves with this army of leaders that you and the Multiply podcast are leading, the millennials and the Gen Zs and the young adults and those that I'm so enamored with today, and I'm so proud of to a great extent today, because they want to hear the cold, hard, brutal truth.
Yes.
Give me the truth. And they don't run from it. In fact, it's like the firemen and the police officers who run to it instead of away from it. They want to run to it. And this is why I say today that if you want to go into the ministry or you want to live the Christian life, it's not for wimps.
No.
It's just not. And people say, well, I thought you wanted to teach leadership and you wanted to encourage people to be leaders. And I said, yes, I do. But yet you start by telling them leadership's not for wimps and that there's a suffering that goes along with it. And I say, yes. And the millennials and the Gen Zs actually like to hear that because already in their life, they realize that is the truth.
Yeah, you're being honest with them. So you've gained credibility.
And they want to sit at the table with someone who will say, this is what I've gone through, and I've come out on the other side of it. You can do it too.
Yeah.
It's okay. The Lord understands the rejection. He understands what you're going through. He understands the psychic agony that sometimes we go through in life.
Yes.
And he understands that place of isolation and that place of loneliness, and that, you're not alone. You're not going to go through it by yourself. There's other people that go through it. I've been through it. I've come out on the other side. I may have to go through it again. And you just have to learn that it's sometimes hard to trust him.
Yeah.
But thank God we've got him to trust.
Yeah.
And they want to hear this. They want to hear the truth.
And for those of you that are, young leaders, older leaders, doesn't matter. But if you've entered into a season of suffering and maybe, before you went into it, you thought, well, that's okay if God wants to bring it, naively, if this is the Lord's will, if I'm going to go through this season, I'll go through the desert and we'll do it. And then you get into it and you think, no, I need to back out. My encouragement to you would be very simple. The only way out is through. You've got to go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is no backing out. You're in, you go through.
Part of that truth is, and you and I have discussed this, and behind you on the bookshelf are a couple of books that I've recommended to
Yes.
someone. You've got them all.
I have several more upstairs.
And it's Friedman's book, on leadership. And he's a Jewish rabbi, but he's talking about leadership. And it's called Failure of Nerve. Yeah, there you go.
That's the book right there.
Yeah, Edwin Friedman. Leadership in the Age of
The Quick Fix.
The Quick Fix. And so he says that the crucible here is the failure of nerve. Then you have Todd Bolsinger, who's Fuller Theological Professor and a great mentor and friend of mine, a great author.
Amazing.
And we've had him in one of our LeaderLabs conferences, Leadership Off the Map.
Yeah, I was so excited to meet him in person.
Yeah, and it was awesome to see that. Well, his book, which is on the bookshelf, Canoeing the Mountains, where he calls it, the failure of heart. And in his companion book, or another one of his books, Tempered Resilience, look here, he's pulling them all off of the shelf. But Todd Bolsinger talks about where Edwin Friedman says, well, here's one column, and it's failure of nerve, and the other is failure of heart. And what Todd Bolsinger says is the heart. It's the crucible. And it's this crucible that leaders find themselves in, where we either will decide to step out of the arena of leadership because of one or two things. And it's why, before we go beating everybody up by saying, well, why did they get off the path of humility and confidence in God? Well, life happens, and life's hard, and leadership is hard. Living the Christian life is hard, and sometimes it's hard to understand, and it's hard to explain, and it's hard to put two and two together. It's a mysterious thing. And so we decide that, well, I'm going to self-promote and I'm going to self-protect, and we get over here and we're over here. And what these two guys say is typically because of a failure of nerve or a failure of heart. The failure of nerve is that I lost my courage.
Yeah.
I stopped being a courageous leader. I got beat up so bad that I just said, I can't do it anymore. And I just don't have the nerve to stand there and get hit anymore.
So you don't launch anything new. You go, I'll comply.
Yeah.
And I'll do whatever it takes just so I don't end up in that place again.
And some people have walked totally away.
Yeah.
They've abandoned their faith.
Yeah.
While others have just, here's the term that we hear a lot today, they've just quietly quit.
Yeah, quiet quitting.
We're there, we're getting a paycheck, and we do this in the ministry. We also do it in the marketplace where we're on the job, but we're just not giving everything anymore. And so it's failure of nerve, but how about failure of heart? It's where my passion has left, and that enthusiasm and fresh eyes and that confidence that I once had and trust in the Lord is just waning, and I just don't have it anymore. And what I'm out here trying to say is it doesn't have to be that way. I realize that because of these things, we have oftentimes left the arena that Roosevelt said every leader is in, and we've gone to the cheap seats. We've quietly quit. We have jumped in with the great resignation.
Yeah.
And we walked away, either literally or emotionally and spiritually. And I'm trying to say to people again, it doesn't have to be that way. I'm saying to those of us, the boomers and olders, the great generation, we have a few of those still left around, but the boomers and then
Gen Xers,
to all of us, I say, get back in the arena
Yeah.
And I'm saying to all those young people that are listening, to the millennials and to all of the younger ones that are there, get in the arena.
Yeah.
Put on the whole armor of God and jump down here. Yeah, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's worth it.
But it is so worth it.
Yeah.
To be there. And I'm looking back, now 68 years, with some wisdom, I hope, saying that I've been beat up. I've gone through some trials and tribulations and some very hard times, a lot of rejection. But what I find out is that those hard times and those rejections are oftentimes from the Lord's perspective, is a redirection.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's used those things in my life.
I can echo the same thing. I can echo the exact same thing. If you're in ministry for long enough, you will, if you're in leadership for any period of time, you will go through hardship. You will go through trials. You will go through betrayals. Things like that happen, even in the church. It's no surprise, no shock. Failure of heart, failure of nerve.
Yeah.
I heard a really good sermon in the last 4 years. I heard quite a few of them, but one of them that really marked me. And said, whenever you go through trial as a leader, whenever you go through hardship, whenever you go through, just a crucible, the enemy will try to destroy you. So you just quit, get out, back off, give up. You know what I mean? There's a failure of heart. I have no more drive. I have no more passion. I have no more, I'm out, I'm done. But if the enemy can't destroy you, he'll try to allow if the traumatic experience doesn't destroy you, he will try to use it to define you. And that becomes a failure of nerve, where it's like, Dr. Garmon, he's still in ministry, but he's known for having suffered that, struggle, that attack. And that's what your ministry is defined by.
Right.
And then you no longer have any more nerve to attempt, to try, to do, to be, to explore, to expand, to pursue everything that God set within your heart to pursue because you're afraid.
Right.
And so if it doesn't destroy you, it'll try to define you. But if it doesn't destroy you and it doesn't define you, the Lord will help you to allow it to develop you. And if it develops you, then what comes after that, out of that, is going to be tremendous. And so, for young people that are not in leadership, you know what the cost is of not stepping into leadership? It's to be led by lesser men.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
Right. That's exactly right.
And so if you don't step into leadership, then you have to accept the leadership that's there. You can't look at it and go, well, I don't want the job, but that guy, he's doing a terrible job. Well, then put your money where your mouth is and get involved.
That's right.
Okay. So if you get involved in leadership, just know it'll be difficult. It'll be hard. It'll be a refining process for sure, but it'll be a life worth living. And what you fight every day, it'll be a fight worth fighting.
Yeah. And there's different levels of it, right? Because, I look in the defining reality of my own life. I think that there was a time, I know that there was a time early on when I was first saved, in that humility and confidence in God stage, where as an evangelist, a young youth evangelist going all over. And Shirley and I had we called it a Winnebago at the time. A motorhome.
You were driving on a motorhome evangelizing?
Shirley and I, one of the first things we did as a young married couple, we were driving all over the United States. And I didn't grow up in the church, so I didn't have a whole lot of relationships, but it was one revival right after the other, and one pastor calling another. And we were, God was just making a way for us. It was really naive, childlike faith that we were.
But you were pioneering.
Oh, we were truly pioneering, and a lot of people think, wow, where did they get their start? And you just get your start just believing and trusting in the Lord, and one thing leads to another, and one journey leads to another journey, and one step leads to another one, and you just keep trusting the Lord. But along the way, you just get some knocks, as well, that try to just take you out of the game, if you will. But that's where, if we can pivot with that and go into the 4 principles for a moment.
Yeah, please.
We look at the presuppositions of what I teach to people. The healthy church is the hope of the world.
Right.
Healthy leaders are the hope of the church. The reality is there's a leadership crisis in the marketplace and ministry, and that reality, or that crisis, is a crises of character, competence, and credibility.
Right, right.
What's the answer to that? And that's where the 4 principles that I build everything upon.
Right.
And I built it because it was, for me, everything that I'm talking about. Talk about trying to be authentic. I'm trying my best every day to walk it. So I teach what I've actually been through. And I tell people all the time, you come through my LeaderLabs, you're going to know way more about me than you want to know.
Right.
Because I'm going to use me as the story, as the foundation of what I've gone through. And I'm going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly, because it's all of that. And you need to be prepared for it. And so here are the 4 principles that are the answer to the 4 presuppositions. And that is, number 1, leadership development, or let's say Christian formation, for those that like that term. I look at it as being interchangeable. Leadership development begins with self-development.
Yes.
And it's hard for some people to hear that, because they say, well, isn't that selfish? I thought you talked about servant leadership. And it's where you have to do probably a little bit of explaining. But here's what I like to say, and I found this to be true. Your own Christian formation, your Christian development, your own leadership development begins with you. It has to. Because you can't help anyone if your own life is a mess.
Right.
You've got to understand and come to grips with reality, and you've got to understand that you are the problem right off the bat.
Right.
And you've got to help get you on the right path, on the right road, and keep you on the right road, or everything else falls apart. Right. Your credibility falls apart.
Yeah, nobody's born with competency and character.
Or you're going to live a lie.
Yeah.
Up to you.
You have to develop that. You have to invest in that.
That's exactly right.
That's self-development.
So the formation or leadership development begins with self-development. Number 2, self-development begins with self-awareness. Here we are again.
Yep.
The absolute number 1 fundamental prerequisite for personal growth, development, and formation, discipleship, discipline, is self-awareness.
Yes.
At some point, you've got to have an aha moment, an epiphany. You got to come to yourself, and you've got to have that first, and I like what the scripture calls it, enlightenment.
Right.
Paul constantly was praying that the eyes may be enlightened, that we might see and that we might understand. And it's huge that we can have that first moment of taking our head out of the sand and looking around and saying, oh boy.
Right.
Look at where I am. And then understanding where I am, and that the journey of 10,000 miles or 70 or 100 years begins with that one step, and of trying to keep the main thing, and of saying, I got to keep me right, lest, here's where Paul said it, lest by any means after I have preached and taught to others, I myself become the castaway. And so it is a constant trying to make sure that I understand that it begins with me. But as you're going to see in a moment, it does not end with you.
Right. It's self-development for the benefit of others.
It is the means to the end.
Yes.
But you can't help them unless you start working on you.
Yeah.
So leadership development begins with self-development. Self-development begins with self-awareness. Self-awareness will lead you to self-control, self-leadership, and self-management. How important are these things? And this, again, is one of those lean back in your chair moments where you say, where has that been?
Right.
Boy, is that not the truth.
So self-awareness leads you to
self-control, self-management, and self-leadership. Now, I use those 3 terms interchangeably, really, and trying to help get at what the literature and our experience gets us to, because all the academic literature today on leadership will talk about self-management and self-leadership. They approach servant leadership and all the things about leadership as self-management, self-leadership. And what I do is I don't discount that at all. I think there's truth there.
I agree.
But as John Wesley said, one of his principles was that we plunder the Egyptians.
Right.
We take this intellectual data and all this academic stuff and the corporate stuff, and we run it through our biblical grinder. And if it's truth, we utilize it to help us do. Jesus said that, that sometimes the children of light are wiser than the people of the kingdom.
Yeah.
Because they use practicality and relevancy for their own advantage.
It's funny because, again, coming back to dichotomies, right, where it's two either or, opposing worldviews, we try to put, for some silly reason, spirituality and wisdom onto two opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right.
And it's like, read Proverbs. Wisdom was God's idea. Knowledge was God's idea. Understanding those are all virtues that God says follow those that are saved, that are His, that are sons and daughters. It's things we should pray for and ask for, which we know. We know this. We know to pray for wisdom, to pray for knowledge, to pray for understanding. Well, what exactly do we think practical application and good, healthy teaching is? It's not less spiritual. It's godly wisdom. And that's
right.
a good thing to pursue. Now, I'm not saying that godly wisdom comes from the world or any, exaggeration like that. But what I'm saying is often you will see in secular institutes that they have discovered the laws that exist within our time and within all time, which are the spiritual biblical laws. How often have we read things or heard quotes where we go, oh yeah, Jesus said that first. Oh yeah, that's in Scripture. Yeah, we know that. We just know it in this phrasing.
That's right.
Yeah, and so it all originates back to truth, which is Christ. And so there shouldn't be a separation between wisdom and spirituality. That's silly. That happens whenever we fall into an exaggerative church subculture where we go, well, spirituality is manifesting or jumping around or emotionalism. And it's like, no, there's a place for emotionalism, but not all emotions are sanctified. There's wicked emotions as well. Right. And not all wisdom is sanctified, but it doesn't mean that all wisdom is bad either. Yeah. So there's godly wisdom, there's worldly wisdom. The Bible even talks about, doctrines of demons. Not all doctrines are healthy, Right. And so I think that, to our listeners, if there's any, question marks that might come up, good, analyze, assess, please assess.
Right.
But at the same time, we fall into a trap whenever we go, well, all of this is bad or all of this is good. No, it's neither or. Really,
that's right.
It depends.
It depends. My two favorite words.
I know.
Contingency theory. It really does depend, which brings us back to leaders think.
Yeah.
People that want to grow, people that want to be authentic, think. And they think through the critical thinking aspects of that, the assumptions and the implications of their behavior and of their thought process. If I follow this through to its ultimate consequence, what's it going to be? Yeah. This ideology, this belief, this political stance, this religious belief. And it brings me, or if you say, well, where did this originate? What is, looking back at that. So we have to be thinkers and look at it and to understand too, as you just said, another way, something that came to my mind as you were speaking is that feelings are terrible custodians of truth.
Yes, they are.
And yet we go through life, well, I feel this and I feel that, and emotions end up, putting us into some very awkward situations where we goes back again to, well, let's just define reality here for a moment.
Right. And what I feel reality is not reality.
True.
Reality is reality. I can perceive it. And then the question is am I assessing it correctly? And then the further meta question is, are my tools of assessment assessed?
Very true. That's exactly right. What is it that I'm doing here? What is the container?
Yeah.
Because the container is important. Well, leadership development begins with self-development. Self-development begins with self-awareness. Self-awareness leads us to self-control, self-management, and self-leadership. And I put self-control in there because this is that biblical side of the coin.
Right.
It is a fruit of the Spirit, for heaven's sakes. It is a supernatural ability that comes with the Holy Spirit when He takes His abode and residency in the life of the believer. This is even before what we call the baptism of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
Some of these, the master's degree of spirituality or the doctrinal degrees, if we want to go into that part. This is the undergraduate high school diploma stuff, self-control.
Yeah, it has to be at our core.
And yet we fail miserably at self-control, right?
Right.
And yet we're supposed to have supernatural ability, superhero powers to control ourselves. But I've seen the way a lot of people drive on the highway.
Right.
Christian people. I used to tell my people, when I pastored, if you have on the back of your car, the bumper sticker says honk if you love Jesus, please remove it. Because most of the time when you're honking, it's not really showing the fruit.
Right.
And
right.
so before we want to really broadcast that we're Christians, we actually should probably want to do some inventory.
Yeah.
And say, can I apply self-control, self-management, and self-leadership? Because those terms really do help us to define what the Lord's trying to do in our life.
Right.
It's control the flesh, control you. And so leadership development begins with self-development. Self-development begins with self-awareness. Self-awareness leads to self-control, self-management, self-leadership. And self-control, self-management, and self-leadership will lead us, watch how it comes full circle, to character, competence, and credibility.
It makes perfect sense.
And so
it's practical.
We want to take these presuppositions and these principles. I try to take them and to incorporate them into the phrase that the Lord gave me on a dirt road in hot Cambodia one day when I was trying to figure out how am I going to lead a Hindu Buddhist world and touch them with the gospel. And he dropped into my spirit, inspire hope and empower potential.
Inspire hope and empower potential. Fantastic.
Right.
Wonderful.
Inspire hope and empower potential. And out of that came presuppositions and came principles that hopefully are congruent and that help to build upon everything that I'm trying to do in my life. And if you hear it right, it gets back to that hope, and it gets back to what's in that nugget of something that's inside of every one of us that God placed there in its potential.
Yeah. So we're coming to a close now just because the time has been going on by. Can you believe we've been here for almost 2 hours?
Boy, I tell you, time flies when you're having fun.
Well, now that we're warmed up. So 2 questions I wanted to ask you before we closed. One, to young leaders that are out there that are either in leadership or contemplating leadership, what is some advice that perhaps maybe you wish somebody would have given you in your early years, or advice that you've learned along the journey, a very, very experienced, traveled journey that you would share with them?
That life is tough, that there are hardships, and there are crises, and there are moments of loss and grief and pain and rejection and bewilderment, loneliness, isolation. Sad thing is that it seems we're seeing more of that today than any other time. And it could be that simply because of all the technological things that are around us and the good things that are in life, that we've got more time to be impacted by a lot of that. We're not just having to survive for a drink of water or for the next animal we can kill.
Right.
We have climbed that ladder to the point to where we get focused on a lot of other things, but to understand that reality, that a lot of stuff happens. And don't allow yourself to fall into the blind belief that if a person is successful and you look up to them, that they had it handed to them on a silver platter. Most have not.
Right.
Most have not. In fact, when I'm traveling the world and people pick me up in their nice cars and their beautiful suits, and everybody looks so good, and they take me to a fine restaurant and so on, and I love that. That's awful nice. They treat me better than I treat me. Then the first thing I ask them is, tell me about you. Tell me about you. Tell me your story. And then for the next 30, 45 minutes, I don't have to say a word. But my chin, usually my jaw drops and hits the table. And I think to myself, you're kidding me. You've been through that? That was you? Yes. That's the story. And so don't beat yourself up too much when trials come and when things happen and you get rejected and life don't go the way that you expect it to. And it seems like a lot of other people who are less full of character or less competent are getting promoted ahead of you or going around you or walking on top of you. Stay in that kingdom lane.
Yeah.
And trust the Lord. It sounds so simple, and yet it's so very, very hard to stay in the kingdom lane. Now, I look back on my life, and I am so full of gratitude, and I don't know how in the world he got me here, but he got me here in spite of me, because there's so many times when I did stupid stuff. And, I like to say, you can't fix stupid. You just have to come to yourself,
Yeah.
and you have to realize, I got to change this. And with the Lord's help, you can change it. And so I think that's the first thing I would say to them is that life is tough, but it's going to be all right. And if you can really believe the good news that today don't have to be like yesterday and tomorrow don't have to be like today, but that it is a day-by-day process, that there are no quick fixes, there's no silver bullet, there's no pixie dust, nor magic wand.
Right.
And for those of us in the Pentecostal circles, there's no special evangelist, male or female, that's going to slay you in the spirit long enough or good enough to cause you to get up off the floor and be this great thing you think, or you have that expectation you have in your mind that you're supposed to be.
Yeah. It's not magic.
There's no magic to it.
No.
You got to put in the work.
Yeah. And the Lord will help you.
And you've got to trust him for the work that he does in you. You are uniquely you. It took me so long to get that and to get comfortable, I guess, in my own skin. But you have to get comfortable with being you. And that goes back to being that authentic you.
Yeah.
I guess the second thing I would say to them is to realize that everyone's not going to like you. I was about 38 or 40 years old before I realized that. Talk about head in the sand naivety. It took me a long time to learn. But I can tell you exactly where I was in Lehigh Acres, Florida, in a Ministerial Association service, when the thought of clarity, and this is why I'm teaching clarity, and I'm writing about clarity right now, about how important clarity is, that this moment of clarity came a flash of brilliant clarity. Everybody don't like you. Because I was naive. I thought, that in my humility and confidence in God in that lane early on, I thought, well, because my motives are right, because my heart is right, because I love the Lord, because I want to serve the Lord, all these things, then everyone knows my intentions and my motivations and my driving forces, and that gets some credit, right?
Right.
Not necessarily.
Nope. And you assume that others are like you.
That's right.
You assume that they have the logical formula is,
That's right.
Well, if I'm a good person and a godly person and I want God's kingdom first and everybody else is the same, we're all going to get along.
That's exactly right. But they don't.
But they don't.
But they don't. And this is why, here's another phrase that has become one of my top phrases today in my Clarity Labs. The labs that I am doing, I just finished one in Bristol, Tennessee with a company Wednesday, and now I'm doing one Boys and Girls Club here in the Covey region on Monday, all day long. And one of the favorite phrases there is, your normal is not everyone else's normal.
Right.
You can dial it up and you can dial it back. And please don't ever allow those moments of clarity and truth to justify your dysfunction. The Lord allowed the moment of clarity and truth and the feedback of truth. He allowed it to get your attention and to put you at a point of decision to where you can deal with the dysfunction. Oh, Dr. Garmon said, this is just me. Look at my assessment. It says it's just me. Well, you're justifying your dysfunction. No, he put that in front of you so that you could see the truth for the very first time and you could see that you are part of the problem. James told us this. Everyone that looks into the perfect law of liberty will see who they are. The Bible, the Word of God, a worship service, being in the presence of the Lord is a mirror. It shows us who we are. That is God. That's what God is doing, and He does it almost on a constant basis if we will really listen to that still small voice that's within us. But then James tells us the propensity of every one of us to go our way after seeing ourselves for who we are, seeing that reality, but to immediately forget what we just saw.
Immediately forget. That's right.
Blessed is the man who continues to walk in that truth. And that's your behavior.
Yeah. That's it.
And so that, I would say life is tough. Realize everybody's not going to like you. But then understand how important the favor of God is. You can do all the right things. You can work, put in the work, put in the effort. And I've done that. I've tried my best to be a learner, a lifelong learner, to get to the place to where I understand how important it is to prepare and to really work hard. And I've done that. But several years ago, I think it was during the COVID lockdown, that the Lord just spoke to me and said, but you've started to trust you too much again. You've started to settle in on that. You're not there yet, but you're headed back over, or you're starting to pull back over into the self-promotion and self-protection lane. You forgot how important my hand on your life is. And I repented that day, that moment. And I now think, I hope I'll never go there again. It really all falls on His favor. I want His favor and His hand in my life more than anything in this world.
Same.
And I want Him to open the doors He wants to open. And I want Him to I want Him to help me to see the opportunities that He wants for me.
Right.
And I don't want to want. I don't want my ambition to be of the flesh, nor somebody else's ambition, or the denomination's ambition.
Right.
I want it to be something that just simply, Lord, I want to walk in your truth and be who you want me to be, whatever that is. And it's not found in a position. It's not found in a title. It's not found in a corner office, because all of those things are fleeting and they are a moving target. And we're in Cleveland, Tennessee, the holy city for several denominations, and I get an opportunity and the pleasure and the honor of getting to have coffee and meals with wonderful, great men of God who have walked this path a lot further than me. But I also get to walk and to talk with and share a cup of coffee with people who are mean and mad and discouraged. And it's all because they lean their ladder against the wrong wall. To climb the ladder of success and to get up there and to say, oh, my Lord, now I have nothing. If you want to have friends, you must find yourself to be friendly. If you want to have relationships that will walk with you even into old age, and it's where I'm finding myself now. I hope that I have 20 and 30 years if the Lord blesses me, ahead of me. But somewhere along the way, and I'm telling you, Brother Ed, I've gotten to the point now to where, I want to slow down. I don't want to quit, but I want to slow down. But it's like He's not letting me slow down. The moment I said I want to slow down, he put the gas pedal on and opened up a lot of but He opened the doors.
Yeah, that's different.
And I've told my wife, and I tell myself, I want to continue walking through the doors He opens, but I quit. I resigned from self-promotion and self-protection. I quit. I'm done with LeaderLabs in terms of really trying to push and to convince everybody that I know I've got something that's going to work. And now it's, Lord, you open the door, because now my second passion is painting. I know that sounds crazy, but my second passion is painting, acrylic painting. I love it.
I've seen a lot of your paintings.
And
You're very good at it.
Well, I hope to get really good at it. And I'm actually asking the Lord to let me slow down from doing my day job so that I can do this now. I want to paint because I sense His hand on me when I'm doing that, just like I do when I'm doing leadership.
That's
And
awesome.
even though I'm alone and I'm in that basement and I'm doing this, I'm learning how to do it. I'm not good right now, but I want to be good. And I believe one day I could be good. And I'm okay with that. I'm not sure that 5 years ago or 10 years ago for sure that I would have been okay with my LeaderLabs plate drying up. But that's where a lot of people are. Their identity is wrapped up in a title. It's wrapped up in what they're doing. And when that title and that position and retirement comes, and it comes for all of us, they're lost. And a lot of times they're miserable.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, the three things I would say off the bat.
Yeah. No, that's great advice from years and decades of ministry and a lot of experience. Last question. I'm gonna give you or I'm gonna request of you actually. What 3 books would you recommend? And I said 3, and I'll tell you why, because you could give me 50, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But if there was 3 books that you would recommend to young leaders out there, or to leaders out there that maybe haven't read them yet, I'm going to put these 3 on there already. They're going to be put into the captions of the video. Todd Bolsinger's 2 of his books, and then also A Failure of Nerve by Friedman. But what other 3 would you recommend?
Very practical, and 3 that I recommend everywhere I go, and everyone says to me, well, I wouldn't have thought you would have said that. But everywhere I go and everyone that talks to me now says, wow, those really helped me to go where I needed to go. Number 1, and the Bible.
Yeah.
Because everything else flows from that.
Right.
That, if you're going to define reality, I think that's the moral basis. And I think that is fundamentally the Pandora's box that's been opened up in our society and in our world and the season that we find ourselves in. Todd Bolsinger said it this way, and the reason why I say the Bible, it has to be foundational to everything we do.
Yes. We
have to pull all of our thought processes and the behaviors and everything through the scriptures, through that filter. And so when I look at that, Todd said it used to be, the positive thing was that we would pull, that society would pull our values and our behaviors and our beliefs through the scripture.
Right.
But things have changed, and now we pull scripture, our beliefs and values, through society.
And that's bad hermeneutics.
And through politics.
Yeah.
And it's terrible hermeneutics. But it is so simplistically the truth.
Yeah.
That we are justifying our behaviors and our beliefs and our values, not based on what the Bible says. In fact, a huge portion of Christianity will question even whether the Bible should be used for that purpose anymore.
Which is wild. Yeah.
It is wild, but I call it the bones of Joseph. One of the bones of Joseph, still for me, I've chosen just to accept this. It's scripture.
Yeah.
That's one of those things. You got to keep that first. But then secondly, it would be Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Well, if there's one book whose principles and habits, because I believe in habits and routines, ordering your private world, as Gordon MacDonald said in his great writings, that habits and routines are important. And I think that Stephen Covey hit on some principles that are just jaw-dropping, and they will just help all of us. The book, run it through the scriptural filter and teach it, preach it, but most importantly, employ those principles into your own life. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And then number 3 is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It is so practical and so relevant that it almost one of those slap yourself in the head and say, duh. But as Ken Blanchard says, common sense is not common practice.
No.
And I think we have to start with some very basic fundamentals. And one of my labs that I do now, and is one of my most popular, is 30 Days to a New You. And I start with how to develop the top 20 habits of life. And so it's all about, but they are so basic. And if anybody's been through my labs, they know what habit number one is. If you want to change the world, start making your bed every day.
Right.
Every day.
Right.
There's never an excuse not to make your bed unless you're in the hospital. Make your bed. It's the way you start things and the way you build your habits and so on and so forth. And Dale Carnegie's work about winning friends and influencing people is just so fundamental. And I think we have to get right back down to some real fundamentals. And then you tie those to the basic principles that we find in Scripture, and it's real easy. And if you can get that right, go and get this right.
Yeah.
As the great Kung Fu master said, grasshopper, go get this right. And then we'll go from there.
Right.
You can't learn Kung Fu until you get these things right.
Right. And some basic foundational principles.
And we want today, Eddie, we're sick because we want to delve into spiritual gifts and prophecies and things that are so at the PhD level of spirituality.
Right.
When we didn't get the milk right.
Right. Yeah. Everybody wants deliverance. Nobody wants discipline. Everybody wants the gift of the Spirit. Nobody wants the fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those basics, those things help me. And I go back and listen. When I go back and listen to them, and you can get a lot of things on audiobook now and all this, and you can listen to it. I'll go back and I still hear things over and over and over that just become, more solidified in my own life and my own behavior.
Right.
And so,
yeah, wonderful.
Those would be the things I would say.
Well,
read.
Thank you so much for the recommendations, for the advice, for the time together, Dr. Garmon. So our listeners may not know this, but we've met before, right? Just in working as a youth and discipleship director for the Church of God. You've come and you've taught different seminars to all of our youth directors and so on, for the whole USA. And so I had always wanted to get to know you. And then after I moved here, me and everybody else who moved here from Sacramento, you adopted us.
Yeah.
We all became your sons and daughters. And I'm so thankful that I have you as a mentor and as a dear, dear friend. And I just appreciate you coming, and doing this podcast with us. And I'm so happy to be able to share you with our community. And I look forward to just getting together, grabbing some lunch, doing more of these, and going from there.
Yeah, well, I must say how proud I am of you and of this family and this army of leaders that the Lord has given you favor with. And to hear you say the things that you've said, I guess I'm the most surprised of all of it, is that anyone would even see me in that way. I'm proud and I'm honored.
Well, we love you.
And it's very evident because anytime I get around one of your family and friends and this group of deserters of the California way of life, they honor me and speak to me and will scream at me across the parking lot or the grocery store or church or wherever we find ourselves in, and I'm always honored by that. But I do remember those early days several years ago when I first met you and you were just newly in East Tennessee. Talk about the water you swim in and being jerked out of one culture and into another.
Yes, sir.
To come from California to Tennessee makes. I bet a lot of times you guys said, "What were we thinking?" Because this is different.
Actually, not once.
But I think your group said, "But we like the difference."
That's right.
And you guys were like a hand in a glove, a foot in a sock, and it was just so beautiful to see. But to look at where you were at that moment. Because you were very open and transparent with me about the ambiguity.
Right. And
the pain and the hurt and the rejection and all that you were walking through at that moment. And, the only thing you were walking in is faith and hope and the light that was shining in front of your little car at that moment.
Right.
because and it was shining. It's like they were very dim, and it was like, I don't know what the Lord's going to do, but and to see what He has done is amazing, isn't it amazing?
It is. It really is.
And it's just it is the product, and it's the truth and the end result of everything we've talked about today.
Yeah.
That life happens, and that rejection can be actually redirection.
Mm.
And it is so throughout the Scripture. And if we'll allow, and a lot of times, sometimes we do it to ourselves.
Mm.
You know, we brought it on ourselves. It was it was stupid.
Yeah.
But the Lord doesn't leave us in our stupid.
No, He doesn't.
You know, He will help us get right back up and right back on the right path. And I just want to say to you that I couldn't be more proud. And I'm so excited for the Multiply podcast and the ministry that you and your team are a part of. And I'm just honored to be a small part of it and to be kind of on the sidelines watching.
Yeah.
And I want you to know I'm your greatest cheerleader.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I see that. Yeah. In our case, you know, it was so wild, and you know all of the details and everything, but it was just so wild seeing how the Lord led us in ambiguity. Where what do you mean? Everything's fine at home. What do you mean we're supposed to move? And then announcing that we're going to move and everything else, and then, you know, things change along the way. But you know, just the fact that this is where He's led us, and then seeing that, you know, journey develop and unpack since we've moved here. Yeah, it's really neat, because often what I have found is that God does not reveal step 2 until you take step 1.
True.
You know, and yeah, it's been a really good journey. So yeah, thank you for being a part of it, and thank you for you know, all of your investment. I just look forward to, you know, where everything's headed from here. So
Amen.
Yeah. So to all of our listeners, thank you guys for being with us. We appreciate it, and you know, we really hope that actually, I'm certain that today's podcast was definitely a blessing to many of you. So it's been good to be together. All right, guys. Thanks, and God bless.